Greetings. Father Mark signing on. Continuing the course on Catholicism in U.S. history. This is the second installment in the unit on slavery and colonialism. The most famous, infamous sequence of events which intruded slavery into Christendom after the Church had successfully eliminated it from Western Europe was the Atlantic slave trade. By way of background, we turn to Portugal. In the year 1385, a 2-year period of conflict brought to power a new dynasty, the House of Aviz, A-V-I-Z, which ruled Portugal for just over a century, until 1495. The founder of this dynasty was King Yao I. His third son was Prince Henry, Duke of Viseu, House of Aviz. Prince Henry changed history, in recognition of which he is best known as Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry funded the construction of a fleet of 40 ships to carry out his dream of exploration and used them on 15 expeditions in his lifetime down the western coast of Africa. They had 4 standing orders. First, cartography. Map making, which is a personal hobby with the prince. Second, to locate the source of African gold so that Europeans would not have to pay the handling fees charged by Arab caravans which transported gold across the Sahara Desert to the Mediterranean ports. Third, find a navigable passage from Europe to the east in order to transport spices and silk by ship from Asia to Europe. Again, without paying the handling fees of the caravans who transported the goods over land following the Silk Road. Fourth, standing order, spread Christianity to any new peoples who had not heard of it. Prince Henry died in 1460, during the year of the reign of Pope Pius II. By that point, mariners in his employment had mapped the Atlantic African coast down to present-day Senegal. So, okay. So we are to orient ourselves here. Right, so you see Lisbon on the map. That's Portugal. And down here, so he wanted to get all the way over to India, where they could get spices, over to China, where they could get silk, which is just up here, Shanghai, Eastern. But of course that, but as it existed, the Silk Road. Well, it's off this map. Some of it went through here. The Silk Road basically was an overland caravan route that they would meet at. They could go to India first, then continue. It would go to Samarkand, which is in present-day Uzbekistan, and then the merchants from China would come from China to Samarkand, and then that's where all the trade would take place. But, you had to pay these caravans, for all of that. So Prince Henry wanted to be able to sail all the way over on his own ships to go back and forth and bring all the goods the spices, the silk, whatever else of value, to bring that back and sell in Europe, and then his people, the Portuguese, could charge the handling fees. So that's what this is about. So they knew Africa existed, and that standing order about the African gold. So here is the Sahara Desert. From this, like when we say North Africa, old Roman Africa, was between the Sahara and the Mediterranean. The Sahara itself is larger than the United States. And then down in sub-Saharan Africa, which is on the fold here, is where the gold mines were. So again, as this Arab caravan merchants would go over, cross over the Sahara, and they charge for that. Is it? That's a service. So this is all what Prince Henry wanted to circumvent. So going up, so up here, you see Gibraltar. So right above this would be Spain and Portugal up here. So by the time they would go, they had no idea how large Africa was, and there's no way they could. So they would go down and chart and map and then go back and report. Then the next expedition would go further. Next expedition, next was to go further. So by the time he died in 1460, they had mapped down to Senegal here. And they had no idea how big it was, but that was the plan. In 1434, while Prince Henry was still alive, one of his mariners, Gil Yanis, became the first European to sail south past the first bulge. It doesn't even look like, compared to the rest of it, it wouldn't. But Cape Boa, no, it's not even on this map. It's this map isn't detailed enough. But the Western Sahara. So he was the first one here. He got this far. It was a bulge, and he's the first one that made it there. And every time they came to a bulge and land, they thought, okay, this is it. When we get around that, then we start going, and then we're going to be able to go all the way to Asia. So they would mark these, and so it doesn't look like much now, but that's where it was. Yeah, right there. That was the first milestone in this period of Portuguese exploration sponsored by Prince Henry. To facilitate their exploration, then the Portuguese conquered the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa. It's across from southern Morocco. Was it on that? Yeah. So it's on this map. See, here's Africa, and then over here is Canary Islands, right there. So Africa, Canary Islands, Lisbon up there. See? Significant because of what happened next, and it's not a pleasant story. The Portuguese felt justified in enslaving the indigenous population of the Canary Islands as spoils of war. The right of conquest idea. This marks the return of individual slavery into European practice. For the first time since the conversion of the Roman Empire, though it was not on the continent, it was on the islands. So Portugal was a Catholic country, and they had priests, were chaplains, and they saw this, and they were, horrified, reported it up the chain. Okay, what do we do? These people are doing it. So the Pope responded. On January 13th, 1435, Pope Eugenius IV put out a papal, I know it doesn't sound right in English, they used to call them papal bulls, B-U-L-L. It doesn't mean what you think. It's from the Latin word bulla, B-U-L-L-A, for seal. So a papal bull is a document from the Pope that has the Pope's seal on it. And like all of these, it's tied up by the first two words in Latin, sicut dudum. And this he condemns. He condemns slavery, this revival of slavery. So I won't read the whole thing, but here's some excerpts. And it's significant because if they had listened, just listen to the Pope's teaching, none of that this is like 60 years almost before Columbus stumbled on the Americas. If they had just followed the Pope's teaching, none of that horror would have happened. The African slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, the plantation economy, none of that would have happened, at least not based on slavery. It wouldn't have happened. But, okay, so this is Pope Eugenius's words. Not long ago, we learned from our brother Ferdinand, he was a bishop, the following facts. In the said islands, this is Canary Islands, the inhabitants, imitating the natural law alone, and not having known previously any sect of the apostles, meaning they were still pagan, have a short time since been led into the Orthodox Catholic faith with the aid of God's mercy. Nevertheless, with the passage of time, it has happened that in some of these said islands, some Christians, we speak of this with sorrow, with fictitious reasoning and seizing an opportunity, have approached said islands by ship and with armed forces taken captive, and even carried off to lands overseas very many persons of both sexes. They have deprived the natives of the property or turned it to their own use, and have subjected some of the inhabitants of said islands to perpetual slavery, sold them to other persons, and committed other various illicit and evil deeds against them. That's against the women. So you don't need me to explain what that means. Causing no little harm to the Christian religion. Therefore we, to whom it pertains, to rebuke each sinner about his sin, exhort, through the sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ, shed for their sins, one and all, temporal princes, and all others of every kind among the Christian faithful, of whatever state, grade, or condition, that they themselves desist from the aforementioned deeds, cause those subject to them to desist, and restrain them rigorously. We order and command all and each of the faithful of each sex, within the space of 15 days of the publication of these letters in the place where they live, that they restore to their earlier liberty all and each person of either sex who were once residents of said Canary Islands, and made captives since the time of their capture, and who have been made subject to slavery. These people are to be totally and perpetually free, and are to be let go without the exaction or reception of money. If this is not done when the 15 days have passed, they incur the sentence of excommunication, lete sententiae, by the act itself, from which they cannot be absolved, except at the point of death, even by the Holy See, or by any Spanish bishop, or by the aforementioned Ferdinand, the Bishop Ferdinand, unless they have first given freedom to these captive persons and restore their goods. We will that like sentence of excommunication be incurred by one and all who attempt to capture, sell, or subject to slavery baptized residents of the Canary Islands, or those who are freely seeking baptism, from which excommunication cannot be absolved except as was stated above. Okay, that's a few excerpts. If you read the whole text, you see I skipped some things, but that's enough. You see the content. He was ignored, as popes have usually been ignored when they say things that people just don't want to hear. Portugal was a Catholic country with a Catholic monarch, so This tells us clearly that they did not revive the practice of slavery because they were Catholic. Rather, they did it acting like bad Catholics, those who were not obedient to the Holy Father. So, yeah, maybe I'm sure there was lucrative economic motivation for them doing this. And they chose that over the spiritual. But if it just, it's so clear, it's just right there. If they just followed, church teaching, inconvenient though it might have been, depriving them of that profit, think of the suffering that would have resolved. So, the church often gets blamed, for this, because these were Catholic countries, Portugal and Spain, which we'll talk about next, were Catholic countries, and there's no denying that. But they did not do it because of their Catholic faith. They were disobeying the magisterium of their Catholic faith by doing it. 1442, another Portuguese mariner named Nuno Tristão landed on Cape, it's in Mauritania, Africa. He captured 29 Muslims engaged in the caravan trade across the Sahara, and tortured them to obtain information about the location of the mines where African gold was dug up for transport to the Mediterranean ports. These guys probably didn't know, because but that's the whole thing with the caravan. That one leg of the caravan brings it to this place, then they trade, then brings another group brings another. So they probably didn't even know where the original mine was, which could have been 1,000 miles away. Their sheikh, their local Arab sheikh or chief, was responsible for his men. So he proposed an exchange. He wanted his men back. And in exchange, he would give Tristão an equal number of black Africans whom he owned as slaves. So the indigenous Africans at this point were mostly, with the exception of Ethiopia and another place that I'll talk about, were animist. I mean, they were still, practicing animism, which is a form of paganism. Or they were Muslims, and so for the Muslims, it's okay. It's permissible according to Sharia to enslave those who are not Muslims, and these indigenous sub-Saharan Africans at the time were animist, obviously not Muslims, so they could be enslaved. So he said, all right, you have 14 of my guys, and I have 14 slaves, and so I'll just trade you. I want my guys back, and you take these. In a decision that changed history, Tristão accepted the exchange. The European traffic in African slaves commenced with this bargain. Again, if the teaching of Pope Eugenius had been obeyed, this moral atrocity would not have taken place. Now, of course, capturing those Arab caravan people and torturing them for information, I mean, that's not right either. That's certainly not a right act. And if he had followed his Catholic faith, he wouldn't have done that either. So, moving forward, 20 years later, 1462, Pope Pius II repeated that baptized Christians were not to be enslaved. And this is why, again, the church is mocked for this. And, in history books about the missions, they say, okay, these missionaries baptized thousands of people in one day. And they're mocked for that. Well, this was this context. Once it became clear to the church that its teachings were going to be ignored on this issue because there was just too much money to be made, but there was still in that law that Catholics, we could not enslave fellow Catholics. So that's why the missionaries were doing that. So, okay, baptizing thousands of them, thinking that would protect them. And for a few minutes it did, but then as we'll see, then then we'll just enslave them too. It's money. It's money. It's just too. It was too much. It's like the drug trade today. It was too much money to be made. So even people today who deep down know it's wrong, know the lives that it's destroying. The temptation is just too great to make millions and millions of dollars very quickly. 30 years later, January 2nd, 1492. The reconquest of Spain was complete. Ferdinand and Isabel accepted the surrender of the last Muslim emir of Granada on that day, January 2nd, 1492. And Isabel remembered a Genoese Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus, who had approached her with this idea. He said, okay, the Portuguese, everybody knows, at least everybody in the business, the mariner business, knew what the Portuguese were trying to do, that they were trying to, sail around Africa to get to the Far East, to get to Asia. Well, he said, I have a better way, and I'll get there before them, that I'll sail west, and, and I'll get there. When he first approached her, she was still involved with the war. She and Ferdinand had committed that they were just going to erase Islam, and Judaism for that matter, from the Iberian Peninsula. But in 1492, they succeeded, and she remembered him. So she agreed to pay for 3 ships with a crew of 90 men to test his theory. The 3 ships were the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The last, the Santa Maria, being the flagship. On April 30th, 1492, she granted him the title Admiral. They sailed from the Spanish port of Palau on August 3rd, 1492, provisioned in the Canary Islands on August 12th. The expedition left known waters on September 6th. This was the first voyage of Columbus to what turned out to be the New World, the first of 4. He made 4 voyages. Although he died believing that what he found was just the outskirts of Asia. Okay, let's see. Here's a description by Columbus of his first landfall in the Americas, which he thought to be actually Japan. He thought it was the periphery of Japan. This is an extract from his journal, dated Thursday, October 11th, 1492. And this was the day history changed. This is when he made landfall. And quote, steered west-southwest and encountered a heavier sea than they had met. It's just the writing convention. He write in the third person, so like he's going to refer to himself as the admiral instead of saying I. That's just the writing conventions. And refer to his crew as they instead of we or us. A heavier sea than they had met with before in the whole voyage. Saw Pordalis, that's a bird, seabird, smaller than a seagull, but a seabird, and a green rush near the vessel. The crew of the Pinta saw a cane and a log. They also picked up a stick, which appeared to have been carved with an iron tool. A piece of cane, a plant which grows on land, and a board. And this is after, for the sake of time, I can't read but this is, weeks in open sea without seeing anything. So they're looking for, okay, obviously we're getting close to land. The crew of the Nina saw other signs of land and a stalk loaded with rose berries. These signs encouraged them, and they all grew cheerful. Sailed this day till sunset, 27 leagues. A league is 3 miles, so 27 times 3 to get the miles. After sunset, steered their original course west and sailed 12 miles an hour till 2 hours after midnight, going 90 miles, which are 22 leagues and a half. And as the Pinta was the swiftest sailor and kept ahead of the admiral, she discovered land and made the signals which had been ordered. The land was first seen by a sailor named Rodrigo, although the admiral, at 10 o'clock that evening, standing on the quarterdeck, saw a light, but so small that he could not affirm it to be land. Calling to Pedro Gutierrez, groom of the king's wardrobe, he told him he saw a light, and bid him look that way, which he did, and saw it. He did the same to Rodrigo Sanchez of Segovia, whom the king and queen had sent with a squadron as comptroller. But he was unable to see it from his situation. The admiral again perceived it once and twice, appearing like a light of wax candle moving up and down, which some thought an indication of land. But the admiral held it for certain that land was near. For which reason, after they had said the Salve Regina, which the seamen are accustomed to repeat, the admiral directed them to keep a strict watch upon the forecastle and look out diligently for land. And to him who should first discover it, he promised a silken jacket, besides the reward which the king and queen had offered, which was an annuity of 10,000 maravedis. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the land was discovered, at 2 leagues' distance. They took in sail and remained under the square sail, lying till day, which was Friday, when they found themselves near a small island, one of the Lucayos, called in the Indian language Guanahani. Presently, they descried people, naked, and the admiral landed in a boat, which was armed, along with Martin Alonso Pinzon, Vincent Yanez, his brother, captain of the Nino. The admiral bore the royal standard, and the 2 captains each a banner of the Green Cross, which all the ships had carried. This contained the initials of the names of the king and queen, each side of the cross, and a crown over each letter. They arrived on shore. They saw trees, very green, many streams of water, and diverse sort of fruits. The admiral called upon the 2 captains and the rest of the crew who landed, as also to Rodrigo, notary of the fleet, and the other, Rodrigo Sanchez of Segovia, to bear witness that he, before all others, took possession, as in fact he did, of that island for the king and queen, his sovereigns, making the requisite declarations, which are more at large set down here. Well, I'm not going to read all that. Here follows the precise words of the admiral, quote, "As I saw that they were very friendly to us, and perceived that they could be much more easily converted to our holy faith by gentle means, I presented them with some red capes and strings of beads to wear upon their neck, and many other trifles of small value, wherewith they were much delighted, and became wonderfully attached to us. Afterwards they came swimming to the boats, bringing parrots, balls of cotton thread, many other things, which they exchanged for articles we gave them, such as glass beads and hawks' bells, which trade was carried on with the utmost good will. But they seemed on the whole to me to be very poor people. They all go completely naked, even the women. All whom I saw were young, not above 30 years of age, well made, with fine shapes and faces, their hair short and coarse like that of a horse's tail, combed toward the forehead, except a small portion which they suffered to hang down behind and never cut. Some paint themselves with black, which make them appear like those of the Canaries, neither black nor white. Others were white, others with red, and others with such colors as they can find. Some paint the face, others the whole body, others only the eyes, still others the nose. Weapons they have none, nor are acquainted with them, for I showed them swords which they grasped by the blades and cut themselves through ignorance. It appears to me that the people are would be good servants. It appears to me that the people would be good servants, and I am of the opinion that they would very readily become Christians, as they appear to have no religion. They very quickly learn such words as are spoken to them. If it please our Lord, I intend at my return to carry home 6 of them to your highnesses, that they may learn our language. I saw no beast in the island, nor any sort of animals except parrots." These are the words of the admiral. So the Spanish, like the Portuguese, implemented the practice of slavery in the lands they explored in the New World, justified in their minds by right of conquest. An essential historical document permitting us to establish the relevant dates is a royal decree issued in Spain on the 20th of December, 1503. The background is to be found, once again, in the sins of jealousy, envy, and greed. The colonial authorities, asserting dominion over the indigenous peoples of the New World, wanted cheap labor to exploit the vast resources of the Americas. Through relatives, contacts, business associates, and corrupt government officials, they managed to get what they wanted in this December 20th decree, issued in the name of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel of Spain. In part, it read, quote, "Now we are informed that because of the excessive liberty enjoyed by the said Indians, they avoid contact and community with the Spaniards. You, or the said governor, will compel and force said Indians to associate with the Christians of the island and to work on their buildings, and to gather and mine the gold and other metals, and to till the fields, and produce food for the Christian inhabitants and dwellers of the said island." Okay, there it is. This decree began the systematic enslavement of the indigenous people of the Americas. They are, in this document here, they're called Indians, owing to the initial, misunderstanding of Columbus that he had indeed discovered the outer fringes of either India, Japan, or China. So the method was as follows. How did they do this? The King of Spain and also the King of Portugal carved up their American discoveries into units of land. A royal grant of such a unit of land was called an encomienda, from the Spanish encomendar, which means to entrust. Initially, it was granted to soldiers who would settle to build the colony, but was later extended to anybody who would go as a means of recruiting colonists. The encomienda characterized the early period of Spanish colonial settlement, which was militaristic and was built on forced labor, precisely as the Roman Empire had been. As the generations passed and a colonial culture developed, with colonists from Spain having children born in the New World, the encomienda evolved into a replica of the ancient Roman latifundia. You remember, that means extensive farm, wide farm, big farm, or plantation. This is familiar in their colonial context with a different term, the hacienda. It's a elision. It's two words. So from the Latin facere, meaning to make, and that becomes, in Spanish, that becomes facienda, which means things to be done, and that becomes one of the participles of it becomes a fazenda, which becomes a noun, which just means a large farm. So hacienda is derived from facenda, large farm, but through that Latin. Hacienda were large, well-organized estates with villages of free Spanish colonists, towns at the intersection of roads and river ports, and slave labor. The haciendas were the proto-plantations of the New World, imitated by the antebellum culture of the American South. Depending on topography, hacienda grants could include mines, factories, in addition to large-scale planting operations or the breeding of animals. The encomendero, and later the hacendado, became lords. It was just like feudalism, that holding power, prestige, and position analogous to the landed nobility of Europe, but with far more real power, as slavery no longer existed within the borders of Europe. Spain, like Portugal, was a Catholic country, ruled by Catholic monarchs. But we know from the teaching of the Pope, of Eugenius, that this was not Catholic policy that they were implementing. They were implementing this policy as disobedient Catholics. And they have no excuse for that ignorance, as Pope Eugenius had condemned this in 1435, whereas this, in Encomienda, this is 1503. In the next year, 1504, the 216th Pope, Julius II, attempted to establish an ecclesiastical organization for these new discoveries. He created a metropolitan see at Yaguata with 2 suffragan dioceses. But he did it without consulting the King of Spain, who was Ferdinand, by that point ruling alone since the death of Isabella earlier that year. Isabella's heir, Juana, was, she was insane. I mean, it's Juana the Mad, if you're familiar with Spanish history. And that's not just making fun. I mean, it was really sad. Her husband died. She married Philip von Habsburg. He died, and then that was like a trigger. She kept his corpse. She traveled around with it. It was really sad. It was genuine mental illness. So she was, she was out of the loop. So Ferdinand, therefore ruling alone, informed Julius that he was furious, that the Pope did this without consulting him. Well, canonically, why should he? The Pope is the Pope. He can create dioceses. Well, Ferdinand enlightened him as to the realities of logistics. He told the Pope, the only way your clergy are going to get there are on my ships. And if I don't want a diocese somewhere, a bishop's not coming on my ship. Do you have a navy? Do you know how to get there? No. At this point, no. That being the case, Ferdinand would only transport clergy if he approved of Vatican policy. So it was a smackdown, and there's no doubt about it. So Ferdinand demanded the right of royal patronage, the patronato real, as expressed in Spanish. In return, he offered financial support and logistics to fund and supply manpower and resources to establish the church in the New World. Necessity exists, just like St. Paul and St. Peter back, with slavery in the Roman Empire. Well, okay, that they have the power, they have the guys with guns, they have the ships. So what do? You say no, and then don't try to spread the faith, or do you try to cooperate and try to make the best of it? Well, the Pope chose the latter. He swallowed his anger, and in 1508, it took him a while, it took him years to swallow it, but finally in 1508, he issued a papal bull Universalis Ecclesiae, which gave in. It granted to the monarchy control over the turnae, which are a list of 3 nominees to fill positions of bishop or archbishop, and to submit the 3 names, and then had essentially veto power over whichever one the Pope picked. So this is not, the proper procedure in canon law. It's a concession to necessity in hopes of achieving the higher good of spreading the church. Or the alternative would be just to be excluded, from the New World and just give up. This concession, necessity though it was, established a malign pattern in which the church's dependence on governments for transport, protection, resources, forced missionaries to choose. either to make a stand against injustices when they were seen, and then lose the opportunity of spreading the gospel or doing any good, because any priest who made trouble, well, he's just going to get sent back to Europe. Or accept that which was beyond their power to change and focus on doing the good that they were able to do in their small little circle, their own circumstances. And we'll meet priests who made both choices, and even some who actually did make, like individual priests who made both choices, but at different times in their life, as well as other priests who just made one or the other as a life choice. In 1511, this time with the approval of the crown, the Diocese of Santo Domingo was established on the island of Hispaniola. Now that island, it just means Spanish island, or Spain's island. Half of that island today is Haiti, and the other half is the Dominican Republic. But in the Spanish colonial usage, it was one, And we'll see it was as a result of a later war that France got part of the island, and that became Haiti. But Spain kept the other part, and that's the Dominican Republic. Initially, this Diocese of Santo Domingo on Hispaniola had no suffragan diocese. The first bishop, Diego de Padilla, died before his consecration, so the first resident bishop in the New World was actually an Italian missionary, Alessandro Heraldini, Geraldini. Canonically, ecclesiastical jurisdiction and sacramental faculties for the clergy for this new Diocese of Santo Domingo flowed from the Archdiocese of Seville. So initially, Santo Domingo was a suffragan diocese of Seville. After, let's see. After legalization of Christianity in 313, Seville became the first archdiocese in Spain, served, most notably, in the medieval period by the brothers, St. Leander and St. Isidore, sequentially. It was St. Leander first, then St. Isidore, who finally converted the Visigoths from Arianism to Nicene Orthodoxy in 589. Now, while this may seem a trivial fact, of interest only to specialists, it does reveal the unfolding dynamic of colonial life. In the ordinary Catholic missionary enterprise, an apostolic vicar would be a bishop with full sacramental powers, deriving his faculties from being an auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of Rome, meaning directly accountable to the Pope. But for the reasons already discussed, the necessities and logistics, the derivation of faculties from the Archbishop of Seville instead of the Pope is an indication of how little practical control the Pope had at the time, and subsequent popes would ever have, over Catholic life in the colonies. This should be kept in mind when listening or reading to the endlessly repeated catalog of abuses blamed on the Church in the New World, when in fact the Church had at virtually zero power. And so what do you do? I mean, it's like, okay, do you make, once you denounce something, and then okay, you get shipped back to Spain, and then that's it. Then you don't, and you can't do any more good, or do you try anyway? Priests on the ground in the colonies were appalled at what was being done. One example of their response, you see the two choices, so here's the example of the first choice where you make a stand, occurred on December 21st, 1511. That was the fourth Sunday of Advent that year. A Spanish Dominican missionary named Antonio de Montesinos mounted his pulpit on the island of Hispaniola, and he delivered a scathing denunciation against the Spanish colonists for their treatment of the indigenous people on that island. And here's an excerpt. Yeah, this is the fourth Sunday of Advent, so, the week before Christmas. Quote, "In order to make this known to you, I've come up here. For I am the voice of Christ, crying out to you in the wilderness of this island. This voice will be the strangest you have ever heard. This voice says that you are in mortal sin and live and die in it because of the cruelty and the tyranny that you use against these innocent people. Tell me, by what right or justice do you hold these Indians in such cruel and horrible slavery? By what authority do you wage such detestable wars on these peoples who live mildly and peacefully in their own lands, which you have destroyed in countless numbers, with unheard of murders and ruin? Are they not men? Do they not have souls? Are you not bound to love them as you love yourselves? Do you not understand this? Do you not feel this? Be sure that in your present state, you can no more be saved than Moors or Turks who do not have and do not want the faith of Jesus Christ." Merry Christmas, right? That's a week before Christmas. This outburst was prompted by what he observed of the encomienda system and the abuses that inevitably followed the granting of excessive power over other human beings. So when we think of slavery, obviously the slaves are the ones who suffer the most, but it also does moral harm to the owners because we're not meant to have that kind of power. That's why we never handle it well. Humans never handle power well. That's why the divinity, in Genesis, he did not give us dominion like that over other people. He gave us dominion over animals, but not over other people. We're just not meant to have that. So any society, any authoritarian society, totalitarian society that attempts to exert excessive control over other people will always, 100% of the time, will end up being abusive. Because it's not meant to be. It's against our nature as human beings to have that much power. So when we seek it, of course it's going to be. There's no way to have that much power. Just having that much power is de facto an abuse. So of course it's going to be misused. One of the men, eventually Montesinos was thrown out, but not on the same day. One man he converted was Bartolomeo de las Casas, who had come to the New World as an encomendero, but as a priest. He came in 1510, and he saw initially no contradiction between his life as an encomendero and his ordination as a priest, because he saw himself as, I'm enlightened. I'm an enlightened master. When military service was demanded for the Spanish conquest of Cuba, which was part of the deal for an encomienda, he had to go, but he went as a chaplain. There he witnessed the ghoulish atrocities that occurred during the conquest of Cuba. Here's in part how he summarized it. Quote, "There was one royal official on the island." This is the island. So he was an encomendero on the island of Hispaniola, but he was doing chaplain service to the military during the conquest of Cuba. So this island he's talking about is Cuba. "There was one royal official on the island who, when he was allowed 300 natives, worked them so hard that at the end of 3 months, only 30 were still alive, the other 270 having perished down the mines. Later, he received another consignment of much the same number, or even more, and he saw them off too. The more he received, the more he killed, until eventually he himself died, and the devil took his soul. During the 3 or 4 months I was there, more than 7,000 children died of hunger after their parents had been shipped off to the mines. And I saw many other horrors also. It was later decided to hunt down the natives who had fled into the mountains, and the subsequent hunting parties were responsible for carnage beyond belief. Thus it was that the whole of the island was devastated and depopulated, and it now affords, as we discovered on a recent visit, a moving and heart-rending spectacle, transformed as it had been into one vast and barren wasteland. After this experience, Las Casas was spiritually devastated. But he didn't know what he did. That's the old problem. He didn't see what he could do about it. He brought it to confession to a Dominican priest who happened to be the same Montesinos who had preached the sermon I quoted. And Montesinos refused to give him absolution because he was an encomendero. Montesinos declared that an encomendero was a state of life that could not be reconciled with Christianity, let alone holy orders. Las Casas was furious that he had been denied reconciliation. And he argued with him. He said, I don't beat my men, I don't rape my women. And Montesinos replied that even to speak in those terms, as that these are your men and your women, reveals that your conscience has been deformed. That your priesthood was a sacrilege, and that your soul was in peril of eternal damnation. He was still angry, but chastened and troubled by what he witnessed during the conquest and what Montesinos told him. So Las Casas turned to the Bible. One day his eyes fell on the book of Sirach, chapter 34, verse 18, which reads, "The sacrifice of an offering, unjustly acquired, is a mockery. The gifts of impious men are unacceptable." Humbly, Las Casas mounted the pulpit that next Sunday and announced that he was divesting himself of his encomienda, and he returned to the Dominican for spiritual direction. When Montesinos decided in 1515 to go to Spain to present the case to King Ferdinand personally, Las Casas went with him. So they're talking about it now. Las Casas is on Montesinos' side. He said, "Okay, this is an atrocity. It's unchristian. But what do we do about it? These encomenderos, they're the ones that have the guns. They have the swords. They have the economic interest. They have the motivation for doing this. They're obviously not going to listen. I mean, you gave your denunciation before Christmas when everybody was there and nothing changed. Yeah, I publicly laid down my encomienda. Nobody followed my example. So what, okay, now what do we do?" So they said, "Okay, we'll go to the source. We'll go to the king. And then the king mustn't know. He must not know about this. Because the faithful in Spain are not treated this way. So he mustn't know. Once he does know, he's going to fix it." So in that spirit, they returned to Spain in 1515. Exactly nothing was accomplished because Ferdinand by that point was old, tired, and he soon died. So Las Casas tried to create an experimental safe haven colony for the indigenous peoples. But without troops to defend it, those who came there were just easy prey for slave raiders, and which was the last thing he wanted. So now, frustrated, in 1522, he decided he left for a time. Well, not left. He stayed in Santo Domingo, but he left public involvement and to become a Dominican. So he did. He became a Dominican. He spent the rest of his life fighting for the rights and the dignity of the indigenous people of the New World. He was author of some historically valuable works. One is The History of the Indies, or the way he phrased the history of the destruction of the Indies, and a more anthropological work called An Apologetic History. His strategy, the one that he defended, which was certainly not universally employed, but the one he defended can be summarized in three parts. First, to respect, utilize, and incorporate elements of indigenous culture as part of the missionary enterprise except for elements that cannot be reconciled with the gospel, such as idolatry, or in the case of the Aztecs, they practiced human sacrifice and hematomancy. Obviously, that can't be, but there were other practices that that could be. Second, to spread the gospel by peaceful means alone, through persuasion, following the example of St. Paul. St. Paul couldn't force anybody to convert in the Roman Empire, so he only had persuasion. Third, the need for catechesis, teaching and understanding of doctrine before accepting a conversion as sincere. In 1512, again, because he had no choice, Pope Julius granted to the monarchy the right to collect all tithes in the New World. The tithe literally means 10. It's a tenth. A tenth of, essentially, it's a church tax, an ecclesiastical to support the church. So, and a percentage of that tithe, so that the king collected it instead of the church. That's what Julius had to grant, again, because of the necessities. And the crown would collect it, and then a percentage of that would be retained to defray the cost of supporting the missionary effort. But not all. The crown was going to keep a cut. The mission churches that the crown would build using this money would be called the Situado, Situado. Further, in 1512, another huge concession, which, no pope would do this freely, so it just reveals how, abject the situation was. No papal letters could enter Spanish dominion without royal approval. This is the Passe Regio. So that would mean like an encyclical, for example, like Eugenius is. That the Pope could not just promulgate this, send it directly to the bishops and have them order their priests to read it from the pulpit on a given Sunday. Instead, the Pope had to send it to the king. And the king, who had a council to monitor religion, they would vet it, and and they would decide if it, and only then would it be forwarded. And the reverse. Bishops had to correspond with them first. Send questions to them, because they're the ones who were funding. Well, not really. It's the people whose tax money was being taken, but you know what I mean. They were the ones who were filtering the money, not the Pope. So again, the church had no power, no authority to stop any of these abuses, hideous though they were. But of course, we get blamed for it, because there were Catholic countries. The following year, 1513, another explorer, Juan Ponce de Leon, explored a peninsula jutting off of the southeastern corner of North America. He had been part of Columbus's second expedition in 1493 and had been part of the Spanish colonization of Puerto Rico in 1508. In 1513, he landed near what is now the site of St. Augustine, Florida, that is on the Atlantic side of the peninsula. He planted a stone cross there inside of Jupiter Inlet. He named it Florida because it was during the Easter season, season of flowers, spring. 4 years later, in 1517, the Protestant movement began in Europe, which for seminarians, we covered that in the third year course. And as you know, that was followed by 131 years of nearly continuous warfare. The last of those wars of religion was the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. 1 year after the Protestant movement began, bringing us to 1518, we have another document which allows us to date, the tragic unfolding of slavery in the New World. In that year, 1518, a license was granted by the Royal Colonial Council of Spain in the name of the king. Ferdinand was dead by this point, so the king was Carlos I, King Carlos I, The license authorized a certain Lorenz de Gominot to transport 4,000 African slaves to the Spanish colonies in the New World. This is the first record of a Western government involving itself in large-scale traffic, transport, and sale of African slaves since the conversion of the Roman Empire. The motive? Greed. It's greed. It's not complicated. I mean, it's disgusting, but it's not complicated. It's greed. Commodification. Provided units to be taxed. To this end, the slave trade was licensed in the same way that trade and export of gold, silver, tea, sugar, tobacco, rum, all those things, licenses were granted from the government, which means government control. So the licenses had to be renewed, so you had to pay for the license, and then there are terms for that. So you have to pay a certain tax. So much tax for a pound of sugar, or a barrel of rum, or whatever, and same for so much tax for the sale of a human being. All right, so where are these 4,000 African slaves going to come from? You're not just going to show up in Nairobi and ask for volunteers, to go do this. So here's one account of how they got these 4,000 African slaves and the millions, literally millions more that followed. This is an account of a survivor, as you'll see from the text. It's an excerpt, quote. This guy's name was Odula. Quote, "My father, besides many slaves, had a numerous family, of which 7 lived to grow up, including myself and a sister, who was the only daughter. As I was the youngest of the sons, I became, of course, the greatest favorite of my mother, and was always with her, and she used to take particular pains to form my mind. I was trained up from my earliest years in the arts of agriculture and war, and my mother adorned me with emblems, after the manner of our greatest warriors. In this way I grew up, till I was turned the age of 11. So, 11-year-olds think they're grown up. When an end was put to my happiness, in the following manner. Generally, when the grown people in the neighborhood were gone far into the fields to labor, the children assembled together in some of the neighborhood's premises to play. Commonly, some of us used to get up a tree to look out for any assailant or kidnapper that might come upon us, for they sometimes took those opportunities of our parents' absence to attack and carry off as many as they could seize. One day, as I was watching at the top of a tree in our yard, I saw one of those people come into the yard of our next neighbor, but one, to kidnap, there being many stout young people in it. Immediately on this, I gave the alarm of the rogue, and he was surrounded by the stoutest of them, who entangled him with cords, so that he could not escape, till some of the grown people came and secured him. But alas, ere long it was my fate to be thus attacked, and to be carried off, when none of the grown people were nigh. One day, when all our people were gone out to the work as usual, and only I and my dear sister were left to mind the house, 2 men and a woman got over our walls, and in a moment seized us both. And without giving us time to cry out or make resistance, they stopped up our mouths, ran off with us into the nearest wood. Here they tied our hands, and continued to carry us as far as they could, till night came on. When we reached a small house, the robbers halted for refreshment, and spent the night. We were then unbound, but were unable to take any food, and being quite overpowered by fatigue and grief, our only relief was some sleep, which allayed our misfortune for but a short time." So that's it, kidnapping. That's how they did it. Not only was this in violation of the express teaching of a pope, It also ruined what had been developing into a promising missionary endeavor in Africa. So in the two parts of Africa, so in, let's see, in Ethiopia, there was an ancient Christian kingdom in Ethiopia that went back to the patristic period. But let's see. So I don't have a map that has it all. It says Africa is just so big that it's hard to get on. No, this is just regional. So there was an ancient Christian kingdom in Ethiopia, which, see, this map doesn't, but it's up here but you see the Red Sea, where the Red Sea is. So it's on the African side of the Red Sea. Arabia is on the other side. So that was one. The other you really can't see with this map. It's would be in this part of Africa, the central and southern part, is the Congo River Basin. It's immense. It loops in like a circle, and all the tributaries and distributaries form a series of circles, or at least hemispherical shaped, that irrigates a substantial portion of the African continent. At least the sub-Saharan. So there in Congo is what I'm going to talk about next. The Christian community in Ethiopia was already there, and there's still one there, persecuted though they've been. But this was one in Congo. Catholic missionaries made it to the Congo River in the 1490s. The Congo stretches 2,920 miles in Central Africa. And if all of its tributaries and distributaries are included, it provides water to 13% of the continent. In 1503, Catholic missionaries converted and baptized King Nzinga of the Congo, and he had his son baptized and sent to Rome for instruction to become a priest. It was one of his sons, of course. He had more. In 1521, this son, he was also named Nzinga, but when he was baptized, he was given the name Enrique, or Henry. He was ordained a bishop in 1521 and sent back to Congo to indigenize the faith. This was only 3 years after the license was granted by the King of Spain for the large-scale kidnapping of Africans to transport to the New World as slaves. Bishop Enrique died in the Congo in 1531, by which time Christianity was associated in the minds of Africans with Spanish and Portuguese slavers. And in many cases, Christianity was rejected because of that association. They assumed that just because these Spanish and Portuguese people who were kidnapping them were Catholic, well, therefore, slavery is a Catholic thing. And this association continued to hamper the spread of the faith, not only in Africa, but in other parts of the world. Is the association of the faith with particular European practices that were repugnant, that really had nothing to do with the faith. In fact, directly contradicted the faith. But, what are what is some guy in Africa is like this guy was kidnapped? Well, okay, these are Catholics who kidnapped me. All right, so the Catholics are not my friends. Meanwhile, King Manuel I of Portugal refused to allow Spain to go unchallenged in exploring the uncharted lands. So he commissioned another explorer, this guy from Florence, Italian from Florence, named Amerigo Vespucci, to explore on his behalf. Vespucci made 4 voyages to the New World, and he wrote 2 books about himself. Well, about the voyage, but it was really, it's about himself and how wonderful he was and all the stuff he discovered on these voyages, and they were bestsellers in their day. In 1507, a German cartographer, mapmaker, named Martin Waldseemüller published a map of the world, incorporating all the latest discoveries. And in the course of his research, he read Amerigo Vespucci's 2 books. And he loved them. So on the map, he named the new lands being explored after his favorite author, Amerigo Vespucci. So they've become the Americas ever since. Now, by that time, it still wasn't clear. I mean, it was obvious that it wasn't just like an island on the outskirts of Japan. It's obvious that they had found a much larger piece of land. But it wasn't clear if it was actually part of Asia or not, but it was big enough to merit its own name. So, and what do I call it? So Martin said, well, okay, this guy, he's the one that mapped. You know, I read so much. He actually mapped more of it than Columbus did. So, call it America. In 1518, another New World suffragan diocese of Seville, not Rome, was established on the newly conquered island of Cuba. This was the Diocese of Baracoa, which was, that was the first capital of Cuba, established by the first governor, Diego Velázquez. When the capital of the colony was moved to Santiago de Cuba in 1522, the diocese moved with it. The diocese was relocated again in 1787 to Havana. And then that became the Diocese of Havana. Clergy engaged in work in eastern North America, from Florida to Louisiana, so not just deep, like south and east, were assigned by the bishop of this diocese, and we're going to meet some of them. So this guy was a suffragan bishop of the Diocese of Seville, you know, so working for the King of Spain. The following year, 1519, Hernando Cortez, Spanish soldier who had participated in the conquest of Cuba, landed at Veracruz, in what is now Mexico, with 500 men on 11 ships, looking for their fortune. It took nearly 3 years and a series of alliances with other indigenous tribes against the hegemons, the ascendant Aztecs. But eventually they did it, and it culminated on August 13th, 1521, with the overthrow of the Aztec Empire. 250,000 were killed in the conquest. Here is how Las Casas described it. He's writing after. And he in Spanish colonial usage, what is now Mexico is referred to as New Spain, provinces of New Spain. So that's today Mexico. Quote, New Spain was discovered in 1517, and at the time, great atrocities were committed against the indigenous people of the region, and some were killed by members of the expedition. In 1518, the so-called Christians set about stealing from the people and murdering them on the pretense of settling the area. And from that year until this, and he was writing in 1542, the great iniquities and injustices, the outrageous acts of violence, the bloody tyranny of these Christians have steadily escalated. The perpetrators, having lost all fear of God, all love of their sovereign, all sense of self-respect. The heinous outrages, the acts of barbarity, have been so vile, the violence so intense, the murders so frequent, other acts of despotism so extreme, and the havoc and devastation so widespread throughout the kingdoms of the mainland, that what we have so far set down in this account is as nothing compared with what went on in New Spain. The scale, the nature of the atrocities committed without break from 1518 right up to this day beggars description. Even now, in September 1542, the atrocities get worse by the day. It being the case, as we have said, that the infernal brutality and utter inhumanity of the acts committed have steadily increased as time goes on. From the very first day they set foot in New Spain, which was the 18th of April, 1518, until 1530, There was no respite whatsoever in the carnage and mayhem provoked by these cruel and bloodthirsty Spaniards. And Las Casas was a Spaniard. I mean, so this is not racist. I mean, he's condemning his own people. Throughout those 12 long years, they pillaged their way over an area of some 450 leagues around Mexico City, putting those who lived there to the sword and committing all manner of barbarities against them. This area had originally boasted 4 or 5 great kingdoms, each of them as large as Spain, and a good deal better favored, and each of them inhabited, as the Almighty had ordained, by more people than the combined population of Toledo, Seville, Valladolid, Saragossa, and Barcelona, even when these Spanish cities were at the very height of their fortunes. The whole area veritably teemed with humanity, even though if one were to walk its frontier, one would travel over 1,800 leagues. Yet, over the 12 years of which we are speaking, and during the course of what they term the conquest, which is really and truly nothing other than a series of violent incursions into the territory by these tyrants, incursions condemned not only in the eyes of God, but also by law, and in practice far worse than the assaults mounted by the Turk in his attempt to destroy Christendom. The Europeans have, throughout these 450 leagues, butchered, burned alive, or otherwise done to death 4 million souls, young and old alike, men, women, and children. And this figure does not include those killed and still being killed today as a direct result of the tyrannical slavery and the oppression and privation its victims are forced to endure on a daily basis. And no account, no matter how lengthy, how long it took to write, nor how conscientiously it was compiled, could possibly do justice to the full horror of all the atrocities committed at one time or another in various parts of these regions by these mortal enemies of the human race. Even if one were simply to select 1 or 2 outrages from among the many, it would still be nigh on impossible to describe them in all their bloody and terrible detail. That said, and even though I am well aware that I can hardly recount one atrocity in 1,000, I will endeavor to say something about a few of these incidents. And this, I'm just going to do one. So I'm skipping down. Quote, the Spaniards decided that the moment had come to organize a massacre, or punishment, as they themselves expressed such things, in order to inspire fear and terror in all the people of the territory. This was indeed the pattern they followed in all the lands they invaded, to stage a bloody massacre of the most public possible kind in order to terrorize those meek and gentle peoples. What they did was the following. They requested the local lord to send for all the nobles and leading citizens of the city and all of the surrounding communities subject to it, and as soon as they arrived and entered the building to begin talks with the Spanish commander, they were seized without anyone outside getting wind of what was afoot. Part of the original request was that they should bring with them 5,000 or 6,000 native bearers, and these were mustered in the courtyards when and as they arrived. One could not watch these poor wretches getting ready to carry the Spaniards' pack without taking pity on them. Stark naked as they were, with only their modesty hidden from view, each with a kind of little net on his shoulders in which to carry his own modest store of provisions. They all got down on their haunches and waited, patiently. Once they were all safely inside the courtyard, together with a number of others who were also there at the time, armed guards took up positions covering the exits, and Spanish soldiers unsheathed their swords and grasped their lances and proceeded to slaughter these poor innocents. Not a single soul escaped. After a day or two had gone by, several victims surfaced, covered from head to foot in blood of their fellows beneath whose bodies they had sheltered. So thick was the carpet of corpses in the courtyard, and with tears in their eyes pleaded for their lives. But the Spaniards showed them no mercy, nor any compassion, and no sooner did they crawl out from under the pile of corpses than they were butchered. The Spanish commander gave orders that the leading citizens, who numbered over 100, and were roped together, were to be tied to stakes set in the ground and burned alive. 5 years later, and not wanting to be left out, in 1524, the King of France, Francis I, commissioned a professional Italian mariner to explore on his behalf. So we will end there, and we will pick up with how the French and the English got involved in all of this. So for the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.